Boy, one could say that this movie is Cuckoo. K-Dog's movie review. Cuckoo is directed by Tillman Singer and stars Hunter Schafer and Dan Stevens. A 17-year-old girl is forced to move with her family to a resort where things are not what they seem. Damn, Neon really pumping out the good horror movies this year. I saw the trailer for this movie a while back, and honestly, all I could remember from that was Dan Stevens putting on a weird, awesome German accent, and a scare scene with a woman chasing someone in the dark. And I gotta say, those were probably the two best parts of this movie. Okay, this movie is kind of difficult to talk about without spoiling, so I'll say my quick thoughts and then get into a spoiler section after. So, as I said, it's about this teenage girl who's dealing with some grief/trauma over the loss of a family member. She has to go live with her dad and his new family. They go to this resort, which is led by Dan Stevens, and as I said, crazy stuff ensues. I would say the first 2/3 of this movie are more so your traditional horror/thriller. And then by the third act, it gets bonkers, but it kind of loses me. I'll start by saying that the acting is really well done here. Dan Stevens really puts on a show as this German resort host guy. Similar to Godzilla x Kong, the guy here is really oozing charisma in every scene. He is having a real fun time with this role. It was a blast watching him. Hunter Schafer also does an amazing job as our 17-year-old protagonist. She goes through a lot of emotion in this movie, and you can really feel it. Her acting is really well done. Everyone else, they do a good job, but no character really stands out. The sound design here is also really well done. The sound of the creature monster is really good. This movie also interjects a lot of music into its scenes, with our protagonist being in a band. So there's a large emphasis on listening in this movie, hearing the sounds around you and being affected by them. It'd be hard to get behind a movie like this if the sound was shit. Because as I said, a lot of the plot revolves around those types of scenes. The camera work is also great. Similar to Longlegs, the other Neon movie from this year, we have a lot of these wide-angle shots where you're not really sure where you're supposed to be looking. I mean, you have the main character of the scene that you're supposed to be watching, but you're kind of looking all around in all directions to see if there's anything in the corner that might pop out at you, because this is labeled as a horror movie and shit happens. So I always love those kind of angles in horror movies. It really adds to the suspense. It's almost like the filmmakers are really just playing with the audience, and it's done well here. I overall liked the whole aesthetic, if that's the right word. I believe this is set in modern times because the main character does own a smartphone, but everything else besides that feels very 80s, early 90s, even the overall color grading for the movie. Once they go to this resort in Europe, the movie feels very contained or even claustrophobic at times. But the costume design and the overall aesthetic of the resort and what's going on and the technologies that are used in this movie feels very retro and modern at the same time. It's all blended together really well to sort of give this almost dreamlike haze to the movie. I didn't look this up. I don't know if it's a filter or not, but it feels like this movie was shot on film. It has that kind of grainy feel to it. And I think that does well to enhance the overall vibes of the story. So again, without getting into spoilers, I think my main problem with this movie, which unfortunately was similar to Longlegs, is the writing and the clashing of vibes. I'll say this, when the vibes are on point, they are on point. This movie can get pretty freaky at times. I wouldn't necessarily label it a horror. I know why they did, but after seeing it, I think of it more as a thriller. There are horrific moments, but it's not necessarily the scariest movie in the world. But when those tense moments are there, they really work. However, I'll also say that this movie does get pretty funny at times, intentionally. My audience was laughing at a lot of the jokes that were presented in this movie. So when you have these clashing tones throughout your movie, you kind of don't know what to do with yourself as the audience member. You're watching it and you're not really sure what to think about it. Am I supposed to sit here and have fun with this, or am I supposed to be scared right now and it's just not working? And I'll talk about this more in the spoiler section, but I kind of wish the movie pushed itself in one direction and stuck with that instead of having these mixed tones throughout. Because both of them in a vacuum work really well. But if I think about overall what this movie is, or what I would like it to be, it's sort of all over the place. And again, additionally to the tone, I think that has to do with the writing. You can tell there are definitely scenes that were cut from this movie. The first 2/3 are more typical horror thriller, but that last third kind of goes off the rails a little bit. I enjoyed it, but it felt kind of sloppy. Again, are we going for campy fun, or are we going for dreadful horror? So overall, while I wanted more from this movie, I think I had a decent time. It does enough to keep you engaged throughout the whole movie to see what's going to happen next. The third act was a bit of a letdown. It sort of fell flat on itself, but the well-done acting, the unique story, and some of the character interactions, again, specifically with Dan Stevens as this fun German host, I think is done pretty well and is worth the price of admission. Okay, spoiler section, you've been warned. Okay, so basically this family goes to live on this resort with the outcast sister, our protagonist. I think her name is Beth?
Her name is not Beth. It is Gretchen. Carry on.
I'm going to call her Beth for the rest of this. I don't even know if that's her name. But anyway, so Beth starts experiencing some weirdness with this resort. First of all, Dan Stevens is acting like a fun creep. We'll get into him later. Women are often seen throwing up around this resort for some reason, and she is attacked multiple times by this crazy lady who screams during the night. Through all this weirdness, she eventually starts talking to this supposed cop. I think his name was Henry. Henry's wife died at this resort years ago and is on the lookout for this crazy lady in the night that chases Beth. And all while this is going on, Beth's younger sister, Alma, who is mute, has started having seizures ever since she got to the resort. Basically, what we find out is that Dan Stevens and some of the other resort staff, like the local policeman, not Henry, some of the doctors at the hospital, are all conservationists. They're trying to preserve this humanoid creature by assisting in the mating process of this creature. Basically, how it works is, I'll just call them a cuckoo. It's not a cuckoo, but a lot of the themes and the way this monster works is very similar to a cuckoo bird, which I'll talk about in a bit. But basically, she can't speak, but she has the power of this scream that incapacitates whoever can hear it. So basically, she uses her scream to incapacitate someone, mainly a couple, and will take some of her eggs and shove them into a female. Then she will run away, and once that female has sex with a male, they will breed another cuckoo. The cuckoo will then assimilate with that family who think that they have just birthed a normal human up until the point in its life where it is reintroduced to the biological mother, the cuckoo. And then it'll start to display feral signs and start to have these seizures similar to what Alma is having throughout the movie, and slowly start to gain the power to incapacitate people with that cuckoo call. Dan Stevens and the gang help by allowing newlyweds or young couples into the Lover's Retreat, one of the houses on the resort, calling the cuckoo with a little flute. I believe that's what he uses the flute for, to call over the cuckoo to then incapacitate the female and put her eggs inside of her. He also will then later bring back that couple with their cuckoo child and will basically kidnap them and reunite them with the mother, allowing the young child to take on their cuckoo form. Whew. Okay, so what I'll say is this. I really enjoyed the uniqueness of this idea. I can't say whether or not it's been in other media, but I'm always going to champion an idea that is not The Conjuring Part 8. It's always fun to see a movie in theaters take a leap of faith with regards to its story. Really get into that wackiness that is horror. One of the reasons I love horror is because it can be anything. It can be crazy, wacky stories like this, or suspenseful, dreadful dramas. And there's a lot of in between there. And this movie really tries to deal with a lot of the messages of grief and acceptance while also being weird and campy with this bird humanoid creature thing. The reason that this movie is called Cuckoo, and they reference it even in the movie, is that cuckoo birds are called brood parasites. Basically, a common cuckoo in the wild will have, a female will have sex with a male and then lay her egg in another bird's nest. Let's just say, for example, a robin's nest. Then the cuckoo female will leave and the cuckoo baby will hatch out of the egg, and the robins will raise the cuckoo as one of its own. The cuckoo will eventually get much larger than the robin egg mates and sometimes even kill them to take all the resources for itself so it can be raised as a robin. This is actually referenced in the movie when Alma, the little sister, who we find out later is a cuckoo bird human, she actually absorbed the fetus of her twin in the womb. So it's a kind of little fun connection to the way it works in nature there. Okay, so we learn all that about how Dan Stevens and the gang are a conservationist group trying to preserve this cuckoo species. This is where I thought it got kind of muddled in the third act when we start to really go into the character motivations. Dan Stevens is really hamming it up as this horror villain that wants to preserve this superior species. I don't know, the motivations aren't really there, or they aren't really explained that well, besides the fact that he wants to preserve them. The motivations of the other resort staff also aren't really realized. Even Beth's father, we never really learn whether he was in on it or not. Because towards the beginning, I thought he was. When they first get to the resort, Beth's father sort of has these certain looks towards Dan Stevens' character that say like he's scared of him when he's really not supposed to be within the context of the movie at the time. So I thought that was like a subtle way of saying like, oh, maybe you're like an underling and you really know what's going on here and you feel guilty about it or something. Towards the end of the movie, they sort of just get put away from what's happening. And we don't really see their reaction at the end to anything that occurred to our main characters. So I thought there was something cut out of the movie there. Also, the dog. There is a dog owned by the family at the beginning, and the dog is clearly looking out into the forest. I think he can sense the cuckoo people. The scene where he dies or disappears is clearly cut because we see the dog at the beginning, and then the dog is never mentioned again whatsoever. And like stuff happens to the family and the dog is just not present. So basically what ends up happening is Beth and Henry, they end up confronting Dan Stevens, and Dan Stevens gets in a shootout with Henry. Henry and his wife were incapacitated by a cuckoo years back. She ended up choking on her vomit when he chased after the cuckoo. So he wants revenge and to take down this entire operation. Beth's sister, Alma, as I said earlier, is a cuckoo child. So Beth doesn't want to kill Alma, but Henry does. And Dan Stevens wants to preserve Alma and introduce Alma to the main cuckoo lady. So we have this, four-way brawl pretty much at the end. Dan Stevens and Henry are in a shootout, and Beth and the cuckoo lady, that is the mom of Alma, are also having this fight. And this is where things get a little kind of campy and all over the place. The tone was pretty mismatched because at one point we're presenting this cuckoo lady as, this pretty freaky, scary thing that can incapacitate people and make its way through the night really fast. But at the end, I don't know, I thought she was just kind of lame. When Beth finally takes off these glasses that the Cuckoo wears, because Dan Stevens dresses them up in wigs and glasses to make them look like people. When we finally get the reveal of what the Cuckoo looks like, it's just sort of a normal looking person with like off-colored eyes and gross teeth, and they're balding. I think you could have gone a lot hammier with it. I think the creature design could have been a lot better. Dan Stevens was working so hard to, make sure that these cuckoos assimilate with people and look like people with clothing and wigs and stuff. Make them like look freakier once all that stuff is off. We sort of get this like intense stare down between a Cuckoo and Beth, our main character, but the Cuckoo is just like a off-putting normal human. Like, they don't really look that crazy or fun, because again, by this point in the movie, we're at full camp level. We're in shootouts right now. We're not trying to be really creepy at this point. We're just having fun with it. So I think they could have just gone even more ham. Result of the shootout is Henry and Dan Stevens and all of the rest of the staff there die. Meanwhile, Beth and Alma, the Cuckoo sister, make it out alive. Oh, and the Cuckoo mom dies as well. She gets stabbed by Beth. So yeah, they get out, and in the last scene, they're just driving away in a car with this chick that Beth met. Overall, I mean, the story made sense. They pretty much told you everything in the third act. It was engaging enough throughout the entire movie to keep me interested, but I think once the reveals are made, it could have been done better. Because while the ending is fun, it just felt kind of lackluster. Till next time.